It being October and all, I've dug deep into my horror collection, pulled out The Borrower, which is a 1991 American science fiction film directed by John McNaughton. This might just be one of the rare cases of a B-movie being the film that is ripped off by a much bigger budget movie franchise, but I'll get to that later because as always let's start at the very beginning. After making Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, McNaughton the director was sent numerous scripts, none of which he particularly liked. He has said about his decision to accept The Borrower in an interview in 2017, "When I got the script for The Borrower, I was broke and I got sent bad script after bad script and then came The Borrower, which in some sense was also a bad script, but the conceit that this creature takes the heads off people and somehow occupies their lives, to me it was like a metaphor for what actors do. That gave me something to take a hold of other than just the monster that jumps up from behind a tree to scare you and eat you." The film was originally produced by Atlantic Film Group for a 1989 release, but due to their bankruptcy the film sat on the shelf for 2 years before being picked up by Cannon Films before finally being released in 1991. This answers the question I had while watching this as to why the film has a very 80s feel and vibe to it, even though it is an early 90s release. McNaughton has stated that the release was further hampered and delayed due to them having to resubmit and re-edit the movie on 5 separate occasions to the MPAA to avoid an X rating, finally achieving an R rating for a straight-to-video release, so there aren't any box office figures to go over here, so let's skip straight to critical reception. That has been largely negative over the years, with Michael Wilmington writing one of the few positive reviews in the LA Times saying, "The Borrower, it's distilled horror, very grim, very compact, and despite the lurid surrealism and mad jokes of its plot, often disturbingly real." As for me, I of course absolutely recommend this movie to you, otherwise I wouldn't be making this video, but I do get why this film has received so much negative critical reception over the years. So let's start with what I think is this film's biggest negative, and that is the fact nothing lives up to the film's first 10 minutes. That opening is essentially pure distilled B-movie sci-fi horror gold, where we are introduced to the film's sort of antagonist, somewhat protagonist, an alien serial killer who is being punished by being de-evolved into a human and abandoned on Earth. Once abandoned on Earth, he is instantly set upon by 2 slack-jawed locals, and the de-evolution process goes wrong, leading to some glorious gore effects and even a head explosion. The actual alien character is well done, going beyond just being a cheap guy in a mask costume to being a partially articulated mask that has some motion, and a costume with a lot of little details that sells that this is a real creature, adding the use of lighting, clever camera work, editing and framing, and honestly after the first 10 minutes you will think to yourself, I've found a classic of the genre. It's a wonderfully inventive setup for what you hope is going to be an off-the-wall insane sci-fi horror with comedic elements. Then the film becomes a meandering police procedural, where the alien police character never appears again, and the alien serial killer takes a back seat to our 2 new protagonists, 2 police detectives investigating his murders. And by 2 protagonists, I mean a police detective played by Rae Dawn Chong, who we are introduced to as she arrests a man for kidnap, sodomy and rape. I thought this was just a setup for her character to show she is a hard-nosed cop who takes no shit, but no, her battle with the rapist becomes a subplot arguably as important as the alien serial killer to the film's overall narrative. This means we end up with 3 narrative strings competing for screen time, with the alien serial killer largely being relegated to a fish out of water type character, wandering the streets of LA looking bemused, befuddled and lost, before he's forced to murder someone so he can steal their heads to continue blending in. I think it's this off-the-wall and largely glorious setup that then settles down into being a far more conventional run-of-the-mill police procedural that ends up boring people, and therefore leads to the negative criticism. It's the opposite issue from last week's review of Phantoms, where it started as a conventional deep dark thriller and ended up going entirely off the rails. This week you want it to go entirely off the rails after that opening, and it ends up being a far more conventional experience. But there is a lot to like here. Everything I mentioned in those opening 10 minutes as positives do crop up regularly enough during the film's 90-minute runtime. The lighting and cinematography are beautifully done, and then there are some surprisingly great shots for the genre, budget and era put to use. The effects and gore work is magnificent, and there are several memorable off-the-wall scenes, one of which is probably the highlight of the whole piece, and I won't spoil it here. There are lots of little background details to scenes as the alien wanders the streets that are quite amusing, as is the alien himself at times, plus a few callbacks to McNaughton's prior film Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer for people to spot. The police procedural is also engaging enough that it keeps you entertained between the alien kills, which, let's be honest, is what we are all here for. Whilst rewatching, I couldn't help but notice that I'd seen all this on a much larger budget with Men in Black, the Will Smith film, which at least one of those films, maybe the first, I can't remember exactly, seems to borrow heavily from this film's premise of a criminal alien being banished to Earth and uncomfortably inhabiting a human's body, all whilst being chased by two cops, and he's causing mayhem. So that was The Borrower, a film that needed to go more off the rails than it does to achieve true greatness, but there's enough about it for me to recommend it to you. Like, comment and subscribe, because next week we are all being tricked into falling into the pit, which is very much a so bad it is amazing film.